Uprisings, power struggles, civil wars. There are a lot of revolutions. In the 20th century, the Russian Revolution of 1917 changed the world. Many images are whirling around in my head. Are they accurate? Or are they influenced by Sergei Eisenstein's October? In February, the people revolt and overthrow the Tsar. In October, the Bolsheviks come to power. What happened in between? There are plenty of history books, but I want to know how artists experienced the revolution. First-hand accounts, first-hand history. There are the diaries of Zinaida Gippius, a poet surrounded by scandal, an influential woman. Her Petersburg salon is legendary. She becomes a chronicler of the revolution.
It would be good to be blind and deaf, show no interest at all and write poems about eternity and beauty. Ah, if only I could.
Or the memoirs of Alexander Benoit, written later during his exile in Paris. Every last note made by Maxim Gorky has been subject to academic interpretation. How does he experience 1917? As a Marxist and a many years friend of Lenin, can I retell the history of the Russian Revolution? Using artists' notes and documents. How does the revolution affect them? And how do they affect the revolution? The First World War has been raging for 3 years. Russia is on its last legs, millions dead on the battlefields. The people have had enough. No peace in sight. And the front line is getting closer and closer. What do young artists do if they are conscripted? Is the war really all dominant? Vladimir Mayakovsky, for example, a poet in his early 20s. He is lucky. He's not at the front. He's stationed in Petersburg with the motorized troops. He writes provocative poems. First critical successes.
Hey, sir, you've got cabbage in your moustache. Half-eaten cabbage soup. Hey, lady, you're so caked in makeup. You peep out like an oyster from the shell of things. Shame on you, with your orgies and bawdy. Proud of your heated bathrooms and loos. Stop reeling off the military orders you read about in the daily news.
Annoyance at the Tsar and his war has long since reached even the wealthy classes. Zinaida Gippius, 48 in 1917, lives opposite the Taurid Palace, the seat of the nearly powerless Russian parliament, the Duma.
Like everyone else, I can't get to grips with these times. I don't understand a thing. I'm shattered. There's only one thing to do. To write, and to write simply.
The Tsar must go. A lot of people think that now.
What voice? What mouthpiece do we need to shout? The war in Russia isn't simply going to end no matter what. There will, no matter what, be a collapse. Oh, yes.
People are hungry. There's been no bread for weeks.
Queues of silent people outside the shops. It is clear and frosty. On the nearby streets, it even seems peaceful. What comes will be bottom up, stark and exposed.
On 23rd of February, thousands of women go on strike and demand bread. They march towards the city center, where they are joined by workers.
All over town, the trams have come to a halt. At the city Duma building, the first shots fell. All the streets are full of soldiers who have joined the movement.
Entire garrisons mutiny. 150,000 insurgents in the streets of Petersburg. The writer Maxim Gorky was involved in the first Russian Revolution of 1905, which ended in a bloodbath. Now he's skeptical and doesn't believe in the victory of the street. He knows what it means when revolutions fail.
The looting has begun. And now? I don't know. A lot of blood will flow. An awful lot.
His flat becomes a kind of information exchange for Marxists. Many revolutionary party leaders have been banished to Siberia or live in exile, like Lenin in Zurich. The insurgents still have no leader. They organize themselves. The artist and art critic Alexander Benoit describes the 28th of February.
Maybe this is a revolution. During coffee, my daughter Dunya leant out of the window and excited everyone with the news that there were cars with red flags all the way from Sredny Prospect to Tukov Bridge. The crowd accompanied them with cries. At first, we felt stunned and threatened by the news. But by noon, we'd grown used to the revolutionary motorcades.
All the cars have been stopped. Soldiers order the drivers out, shoot into the air, get in and drive off. A lot of cars with red flags turn off towards the Duma.
In the very first days of the revolution, I write the poetic chronicle, Revolution. Give lectures, the Bolsheviks of art. And went to the Duma with the cars.
In the space of a few days, the old order collapses. Insurgents besiege the Duma, demand a changeover of power and the abdication of the Tsar.
The same old pack of officers are still strutting around the Duma. It's quite plain to me, the socialists are next, the Bolsheviks.
Soldiers arrest Tsarist policemen and set up councils, so-called Soviets. The rebellion is beginning to structure itself.
We were all sitting in the dining room when we suddenly heard the nearby rattle of machine guns. That was at 5. It turned out that there were machine guns posted on our roof and on the house opposite.
There's no stopping the revolution now.
I can't go on. It's so very touching.
Yesterday I felt awful. But today, I feel something like a miracle. Not even the rattle of the machine guns frighten me anymore.
It has got to the point where the only question is how power is to be obtained. But there's no reaching an agreement. And yet an agreement must be reached. Not in 3 nights' time, but in 1 night. How else? Will a government be established or not? Neither the Duma committee nor that of the insurgent workers and soldiers can assume full state power. Something else is needed.
The Tsar's abdication wouldn't be enough anymore. The Duma and the soldiers and workers' Soviets are competing for power.
The phone rang. It was 6 by then. Cabinet elected, all well. An agreement has been reached. He listed names. I noticed that not a single revolutionary has been included in the cabinet.
So the Duma has set up a provisional government. Soon it is internationally recognized. At the same time, also in the Torrid Palace, the Workers' and Military Deputies Soviet is formed. The time of dual power begins.
Come here, newspapers!
The revolution brings new freedoms. Freedom of assembly, the release of all political prisoners, equal rights for all citizens, freedom of speech and press, abolition of the death penalty. A few days have been enough to put an end to the 300-year reign of the Romanovs. The Tsar must abdicate. On the 4th of March, the Russian monarchy is history. All old things are despised.
On the 4th of March, 50 artists gathered in my flat. There were rumors that Alexander III's statue was to be destroyed, an alarming moment.
This is folk art. It belongs to us. And we must do everything to make the people realize this, to make them take what is theirs. All must be done to breathe life into this notion.
Those present act immediately.
To prevent monuments of art from being destroyed, we, the undersigned, have decided to set up a commission for questions pertaining to art. Chairman, Maxim Gorky.
Now then, in order to implement the plans outlined by Gorky yesterday evening, some emissaries went to the Duma today, armed with demands. It was like being at the stock market.
A government resolution is drafted. The Culture Commission can be established.
It's sure to be accepted.
They are granted a number of powers. They are even assigned a militia. Now they are a kind of interim cultural authority. The appeal, written by the Gorky Commission, is broadcast throughout the city.
Citizens, the old rulers are gone, leaving a powerful legacy which now belongs to the people. Treasure this legacy, the beauty that talented people have been able to create even under the yoke of despotism.
Alexander Benoit was with us all day. He discussed his epic with the Ministry of Fine Arts, the Beaux-Arts people, and Gorky. It's all nonsense. The quarrel's over who should be minister of the new ministry. Then they discussed the question of the council's approval of the workers' deputies. Then the question of whether or not to set up a permanent forum of artists. Then the idea of the possibility of a behind-the-scenes battle between Kerensky and Gorky. My husband, Dmitri, suddenly yelled, "All this aestheticism should be burnt." And by the end, we'd completely lost the plot. In the council's latest proclamation, yes, it's no longer the Council of the Workers' Deputies. It's the Council of the Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies. There was a very strange order for Garrison Number 1.
The order strips the officers of power and legalizes the spontaneously created soldiers' councils. It also guarantees that the soldiers of Petersburg will not be sent to the front if they don't want to go. More and more soldiers are deserting, going home. They bring news of the revolution to the provinces. Many are also drawn to Petersburg, to the capital.
We have dual power. The muddled council with its absurd proclamations. And the menace of the front.
What is to happen next? Some say the war should be ended immediately and unconditionally. Others want us to fight on and win back the territory we've lost. On the 12th of March, the artists of Petersburg meet to reorganize culture. From the verbatim minutes.
And, together with the Workers' Council, find a suitable place in Petersburg to bury the many victims of the revolution.
I've forgotten how and where, but someone voiced the suspicion I might force my way into the academy with some organizing committee. At that, a bearded gentleman rose and said, "If Mayakovsky enters the academy, it is over my dead body. If he tries to get in nevertheless, I shall shoot him." That's classless art for you. Someone demands that a commission be founded for the protection of historical monuments. This is immediately followed by a counter-suggestion that a commission be founded for the systematic destruction of art and history. We should wait for the artists to return from the front, for the end of the war, and only then should we call an assembly which would, amongst other things, decide how art is to be administered.
Yes, Russia is dominated by meetings with their meeting psychology.
How does democracy work? And how does democracy work in art? Does it need committees, councils, round-table discussions? Mayakovsky, at any rate, begins by setting up the All-Russian Artists' Council. There is even a demand that the Gorky Commission be abolished.
Everyone around me is bright and cheerful, but I feel as if I'm surrounded by people talking a foreign language. I'm going to found a party of my own, even if I don't know what to call it. The only party member is me. I don't think there will ever be more than 3 members.
Our non-partisan press is without exception such that we ourselves, especially at this time, want nothing to do with it. No space for writers to write their bit. And yet we accept the part of secret advisor and play it with gusto.
Zinaida Gippius is friends with Alexander Kerensky. He is Minister of Justice and then Minister of War in the Provisional Government.
No, please, Zinaida will help you. Soldiers rioted in the Peter and Paul fortress, storming in, throwing out pillows and blankets. There was unrest in Tsarskoye too. Kerensky went there in person and arrested a close confidant of the Tsarina, maybe saving her from lynch law.
Big public demonstration of grief on the field of Mars.
2 million people were there. The puddles gleamed.
In the kitchens and servants' quarters, the most terrible things were predicted to happen today. Wholesale slaughter and similar. Our butler even locked the front door and refused to let anyone in the house. In fact, the proletariat showed their best side. They kept strict order throughout the demonstrations. We walked all over town, even to the graves themselves. The most uncanny moment came when the black flags were followed by the first two coffins, draped in bright red cloth. The new zeitgeist was immediately and plainly visible. The break with ancient custom. I hadn't expected my fellow countrymen to break so unabashedly with the holy rituals of death. There was something wicked in it, something provocative. The coffins somehow lost their identity as caskets of peace, as the symbol of the propitiatory end. The bright red gave them a peculiar vitality. It electrified them. Such a lovely red boat moving above the heads of the crowds of workers was evocative of a commander leading the disenfranchised somewhere into battle. It looked as if the wicked coffins were in a hurry to get to the big pit, where they are sunk to check the merciless wrath of the people. I was particularly surprised at the discipline displayed by the endless droves of proletarians. Strange that there were so few peace slogans. Land and freedom, or 8-hour day, were more common. In other words, vital material demands.
The promises of the revolution have not been kept. There is still hunger and war. For most people, nothing has changed. There's a rumor that the provisional government has no intention of pulling out of the war.
I do not belong to any political party, but I have no doubt that my answer to the question whether we are aware of our present great responsibility is yes, we are aware of our responsibility. And because we are aware of it, we say, stop the massacre, stop the bloodshed.
From the anarchist newspaper Russkaya Volya, 28th of March 1917. For the revolution. Comrades, if you want your manifestos, posters and banners to draw more attention, turn to artists to help. If you want your proclamations' appeals to be stronger and more convincing, turn to poets and writers for help.
Lenin. Yes, now that Trishka, that bragger, has finally turned up after all. He was given an ostentatious welcome, but he got through Germany. The Germans have gathered a whole heap of these pesky Trishkas. They've donated an entire train, sealed it so their spirits don't escape onto German soil, and sent it to us. Here you go.
On the 3rd of April, Lenin arrives in Petersburg from his exile in Zurich, bringing with him his program, the April Thesis.
Lenin started on his campaign immediately. He explained that he had broken with social democracy and would, from now on, call himself a social communist.
He demands immediate peace. He also calls for a boycott of the provisional government, all power to the Soviets and all land to the peasants.
At last, too, came the long-awaited government statement on the war. It is woolly, feeble and unclear, always the same. Without annexations, but stuttered sotto voce and combined with a watered-down resilience.
That makes it official. The provisional government will not sign a separate peace treaty with Germany. The war goes on. The government promotes the war and war loans. Some artists, most of whom are against the war, are given propaganda commissions. Money is to be raised by means of street processions, because the provisional government is planning an offensive at the front. The people of Petersburg protest. In July, the situation will escalate. But first of all, the 1st of May is celebrated, Labor Day. Gorky dissolves his commission. Too little support. He is publishing more again.
Impressions from the street. People seem not to believe that they are free and have the right to demonstrate and sing forbidden songs. They've all gone out on the street to see for themselves. Russia took an incredible step forward, immediately leaving Europe behind when it celebrated the 1st of May as it has never been celebrated in the countries of ancient culture. Yes, we must keep fighting anarchy, but sometimes we must also overcome our fear of the people. The fatherland would consider itself less at risk if there were more culture.
The link between the futurists and the masses, which was created by the revolution, was not, of course, restricted to literature. Right from the beginning, the 17-year-old communist Musya Nathanson from the Vubolsky district led us across the wastelands, bridges and scrap heaps to the factories and the factory clubs. I read everything that I had. Above all, my poetic chronicle, Revolution, Left March, War and World, and my pieces from Satyricon.
The 15th of May. In the evening, the staff of the newspaper Novaya Shizn gathered to discuss the art positions. Mayakovsky, he's without a doubt enormously talented and strong, but he's also a liar. Gorky's tone is very somber. He sounds somehow disappointed in the revolution. For such a staunch revolutionary, this has been alarmingly quick.
To us, the inhabitants of the earth belongs. And we will never ever allow anyone to tear our earth apart. We force everyone to scatter the powder.
Kazimir Malevich, 39 years old, artist and avant-gardist, and famous for his black square, is serving as a reservist near Moscow in an orderly room.
It was dangerous to talk about the inviolability of personality at rallies, to say that I am free and no one can make me butcher humans.
He is involved in training the first cultural brigades. Instead of dying on the front, artists in military service should organize museum visits for workers.
The cynical and naive, mindless and uneducated egoism of the deserters, I'm young, I want to live, I don't want a war, inspired by the Bolshevik sermons, is, of course, worse than any warlike mood inspired by the Tsar's staff.
The government plans its attack, the Kerensky offensive at the front.
The madness continues. As a pacifist, I welcome the offensive, hoping that it will bring at least some order to this exhausted and sluggish country. But I fear Lenin's mad politics will soon lead to civil war. He is completely isolated politically, but his slogans are very popular among most workers and also some of the soldiers.
Gorky supports the offensive as a Marxist. On the 18th of June, 400,000 people marched through Petersburg. To everyone's surprise, almost all the slogans are Bolshevik ones. 20th of June. The 1st Machine Gun Regiment from Wyberg is to be sent to the front. The soldiers refuse. Revolt threatens. The July days. The 1st Machine Gun Regiment attempts to topple the provisional government. Bolsheviks take part. Shots are fired. There are many dead.
To suppress the uprising, the artillery was employed, and troops were called in from the front. I know a lot of details from private letters, but I don't want to quote them here, so I shall simply write, according to reports.
The Bolsheviks are banned. Hundreds are arrested.
What happened in June, July 1917? Arrests on a grand scale, the introduction of detentions and hard penal servitude, the closure of newspapers, a ban on freedom of opinion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, for fear of Bolshevik agitators. In the secret chambers of art are the secrets of state revolutions, of a new life order.
Personally, I was depressed by July's dress rehearsal. This coincided with my general disappointment in the revolution. So I decided not to yield to Gorky's attempts at persuasion, but to leave Novaya Shizn for good and all, and return to my independent solitude.
There are no printing works, no paper, no typesetters, and no print workers. Having things printed is extremely expensive.
I have often seen Petersburg in summer, but never has it looked as grey and unwashed and slovenly as now. Idle soldiers stagger about in droves, spitting out sunflower seeds. Our day-to-day life revolves around our worries about our daily bread. We too have gone almost straight to starvation rations. Here's the latest. Our troops flee the front, clearing the way for the Germans. The loyal units die, the officers die in vast numbers, but the soldiers flee. And the Germans pour through the gates after the fleeing masses.
The Kerensky offensive fails. One reason is that the soldiers would rather shoot at their officers than be used as cannon fodder. Kerensky, who is prime minister by now, is increasingly losing support.
Kerensky has adopted a corrupt way of life, introducing a courtly regime. He lives in the Winter Palace, which takes the form of an unfortunate bourgeois conformism, a parvenu. His brilliant intuition apparently deserted him when the honeymoon of grand celebrations was over. The same insistent suggestions. Kerensky should either take control or hand over existing power to more capable hands.
Now comes the event that has gone down in history as the Kornilov affair, an attempted counter-revolutionary coup. The army's commander-in-chief sends troops towards Petersburg to disarm unreliable soldiers and take counter-revolutionary action. Kerensky fears escalation and dismisses Kornilov. Kerensky orders for 40,000 rifles to be distributed to defend the city. Some of them to the Bolsheviks' combat troops, who are rehabilitated in exchange. Railway workers dismantle train tracks to prevent troops from marching into the city. Agitators persuade the commander-in-chief's troops to lay down their arms. After 3 days, the whole affair is over, but the Bolsheviks keep their weapons.
Russia is gradually de-Kerenskifying itself. No more respect. I'm leaving the newspaper Novaya Shizn. Planning, mystery booth. Munch your pineapples, chew on your grouse. Your last day is coming, you bourgeois louse. This couplet was to become my favorite saying.
The age of agitators. All power to the councils.
Who will notice art now? Who will throw art a lifebelt in this sea of blood? You alone, painters, sculptors, actors, poets, musicians and architects, must close ranks to defend art. Only you can help the young generation who carry the spark of the new. Only you can sound out the call to art throughout the land.
The hermitage and the palaces are already being evacuated. It's suicide. It's an expression of the panic that has seized the entirety of our terrified society in the face of the spectre of Bolshevism.
Lenin is arguing with his own party, the Bolsheviks. Armed revolt, yes or no? When and how?
Everyone is trying to organize a strong government. But civil war is almost inevitable. It's awful.
The truth is that everyone who wants to know knows. The Bolshevist coup is imminent.
Lenin openly supports this hate campaign day in, day out, as if it were a done deal. The papers hasten to inform us that the government is about to arrest him. What an image! Kerensky in his delicate milieu, calling out to Lenin, "Antropka, Come here. Daddy's going to give you a hiding.
On the 19th of October, not long before the coup, a banquet initiated by Zinaida Gippius is held in the house of an influential businessman. Her last attempt to forge an alliance against the Bolsheviks. One of her comrades in arms holds a speech.
The burden of her speech was that we should do nothing, but instead carry on doing what the intelligentsia has been doing all along. I'm not blind. I know that no intellectual manifesto can save us from those cannons. But our sense of honor obliges us to raise our voices before it is too late, so that they know which side of the cannon we are on when they start shooting at each other.
The October Revolution begins. No one can stop the Bolsheviks now. They even have the support of the people on the street.
The government sent tanks. The garrisons defected to the Bolsheviks, fraternizing willingly with them. There's shooting on Nevsky Prospect. A social coup is imminent. We must expect it at any time.
A few thousand people gather in front of the Winter Palace. But the storm takes its time. Lenin has the takeover of power announced on posters, although it hasn't yet taken place.
On the day of the storming, I was out and about. But I certainly hadn't expected it to happen today. Hadn't realized we were seeing the last hours of our bourgeois world order.
At the crack of dawn, Kerensky drove off in a private car. Looks like a flit.
It was not yet 10, and already shots could be heard. Louder and more violent by the minute. My heart seized up. Would the Winter Palace be no more in a few minutes? Right next to it was the Hermitage with the most important artworks of Russia. More precious to me than anything else in the world.
The storm of the Winter Palace begins.
Munch your pineapples, chew on your grouse. Your last day is coming, you bourgeois louse. Munch your pineapples, chew on your grouse. Your last day is coming, you bourgeois louse.
There is only very little resistance. The provisional government is arrested.
An altogether bizarre landscape. Present events are as different from the revolution as October from February and March. As different as these dirty, dark, grey, slimy clouds are from the bright skies of spring. The present situation is this. All the Bronsteins are reveling in their triumph, airy and self-satisfied.
The All-Russian Council meets in Smolny, the headquarters of the revolution. When the storming of the Winter Palace is announced, several delegates leave the room in protest, amid loud booing from the Bolsheviks. Urged by Lenin, the remaining council members decide to seize power. This is the day that will later be called the Great Socialist Revolution in the Soviet Union. First measures, the decree about land and the decree about peace.
According to the Petersburg newspapers of the October days, the soldiers storming the Winter Palace sang a little song. Eat your pineapples. And so on.
In the morning, we discovered that immediately after these few cannon shots, the palace had been besieged and government members arrested. I was suddenly curious to find out what state the palace was really in. I had prepared myself for a scene of total devastation and smoking heaps of rubble, but the palace, thank God, looked as strong and unshakable as ever. Both the square and the surrounding streets were completely deserted. Beneath the dreary grey sky, everything looked like an apparition from the past.
Three-quarters of the newspapers have been banned. All the remaining, including Novaya Shizn, distance themselves from the Bolsheviks, albeit in varying degrees.
Doing away with the freedom of press is a form of physical violence and unworthy of a democracy. It is important not to forget that the unscrupulous Tsars were capable of wiping out entire generations, and that everyone who is intoxicated by the poison of power possesses such unscrupulousness. I would like to stress that an experiment is being carried out on the Russian proletariat. The awful thing about it is that it will long be betrayed by the high ideals of socialism.
The bakery, Au Bon Goût, has categorically refused to bake bread for the house. Our house committee's an organizational disaster. Now the cook and the maid have to queue for hours again. Another nuisance is that the maid, silly goose, keeps putting in requests for Sundays off or what have you.
To acknowledge or not, that wasn't a question the other Moscow futurists and I even asked ourselves. It was my revolution. I went to the Smolny, worked, did what was to be done. The meetings are beginning.
Everything in life has changed. Life has new helmsmen, alive and healthy and strong. But at the helm of art, it's still the old suppressors of new ideas. But times have changed, and our attitude to art must change too. But that will only happen when the people change the helmsman and rescue art from the amateurish private art collectors. It will happen when the people issue a decree that from now on art belongs to the people. I find it absurd to lay down the laws for those who create our image.
Writing is repugnant. The newspapers are one big lie. By the way, Moscow has surrendered to the Bolsheviks after the shelling. The big cities, Petersburg and Moscow, have been taken by hostile and barbaric troops. There is nowhere to flee to. No more homeland. I will, of course, continue to write, because I am a chronicler.
Each person has his own way of trying to survive. Some come to terms with the status quo, others retreat. In March 1918, Russia signs the peace treaty of Brest-Litovsk and loses huge areas of land. World War is followed by the even bloodier civil war, which claims millions of lives. And art? Art experiences a kind of awakening, but the longed-for freedom is only a brief illusion. I witnessed the end of socialism in 1989. I wanted to find the real October. What I found was hundreds of different realities. What is left? Words and works of art.
Friss Ananas, Bürger und Haselhuhn, muss bald deinen letzten Seufzer tun. Friss Ananas, Bürger und Haselhuhn, muss bald deinen letzten Seufzer tun. Friss Ananas, Bürger und Haselhuhn, muss bald deinen letzten Seufzer tun. Friss Ananas, Bürger und Haselhuhn, muss bald deinen letzten Seufzer tun.